Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into one of the most incredible tools in modern medicine, PET scanning. And honestly, it sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie, but it is happening in hospitals every single day. So let's break down exactly how this amazing technology works. So let's just start with a kind of wild question. What if we could use actual antimatter, antimatter, to find and pinpoint disease deep inside a patient's body? It sounds completely impossible, right? But that is exactly the principle behind positron emission tomography, or PET. It uses a fundamental particle of antimatter to see what no other scan can. Now, the antimatter we're talking about here is a very real particle called a positron. The easiest way to think of it is as an electron's identical twin, but with a positive charge instead of a negative one. And this tiny little particle, well, it's the absolute star of the whole show. Okay, so to get that positron inside the body where we need it, we need a delivery system. And for that, we turn to a really clever bit of biochemistry. I like to think of it as our radioactive spy. So what is this spy? Well, officially, it's known as a radioactive tracer. It's basically a substance that has a radioactive isotope piggybacking on it. We introduce it into a patient, and the whole point is for it to go to a very specific place so we can track its radiation and see what's really happening at the molecular level. So how does this spy mission actually work? Well, first, scientists create a special radioactive isotope, something like fluorine-18. Then, and this is the clever part, they attach it to a simple sugar molecule, glucose, creating a tracer called FDG. Once that's injected, it just travels through the blood. But here's the key. Really active cells, especially cancer cells, are just incredibly hungry for energy. They gobble up glucose way faster than healthy cells, and when they do, they unknowingly absorb our radioactive spy. You know, the choice of isotope here is absolutely critical. Fluorine-18 has what's called a half-life of about 110 minutes, so just under 2 hours. And that is the perfect window of time. It's long enough to get the tracer ready, injected, let it travel through the body, and run the scan. But it's also short enough that the radioactivity fades away pretty quickly, which is great for minimizing the patient's exposure. All right, our radioactive spy is now in position inside those target cells. Now it's time for the main event, the moment that generates the signal we can actually detect. And it is, quite literally, a collision of worlds on a subatomic scale. So inside that cell, the unstable fluorine-18 atom starts to decay. And as it breaks down, it emits one of those particles we talked about right at the beginning, a positron. Our little piece of antimatter is now officially loose inside the patient's body, right at the site of that superactive tissue. A positron does not last long at all. It travels less than a single millimeter before, bam, it inevitably runs into its matter counterpart, an electron. And of course, the human body is full of electrons. When they meet, it's not just a collision. They completely annihilate each other. Their entire mass is converted into a burst of pure energy in the form of 2 high-energy gamma-ray photons. But wait a second, that brings up a really fascinating question. Why 2 photons? And why do they always shoot off in perfectly opposite directions? It's not random at all. The answer is just, well, it's beautiful physics. It all comes down to a fundamental law of the universe, the conservation of momentum. See, before the collision, the positron and electron are basically just sitting there, so their combined momentum is 0. In order for the universe to keep things balanced, the total momentum after the annihilation also has to be 0. And the only way for that to happen is for 2 photons to fly off in exactly opposite directions, perfectly canceling each other out. You know that famous equation, E equals mc squared? Well, this process of annihilation, where mass is converted directly into energy, is the most perfect, literal demonstration of it you could ever find. The m in the equation is the mass of the electron and positron, and the E is the energy of those 2 gamma photons that are created. It's Einstein's work happening inside your body. And this principle lets us be incredibly precise. We don't have to get too bogged down in the math here, but physicists can use that famous equation to calculate exactly how much energy is released from even a tiny bit of mass. What this example shows is that a minuscule amount of mass, way less than even a single proton, converts into a very specific, and more importantly, a very detectable amount of energy. That predictability is what makes this whole thing possible. And because the physics of this is so consistent, the energy signature of the photons is always the same.
Every single time, each photon bursts out with this very specific energy level.
So the total energy released is just the energy of the electron plus the energy of the positron, which adds up to 1.022 mega-electron volts. Since that energy gets split perfectly between the two new photons, each one carries exactly half, 0.511 MeV. And it's these precise little packets of energy that the PET scanner is designed to look for.
Okay, so we've got these pairs of gamma rays flying out in opposite directions from deep inside the patient's body. The next big challenge is, how do we catch them? And how do we use them to figure out exactly where they came from? Well, that is the job of the PET scanner itself. The scanner itself is basically a huge donut-shaped machine, and the inside of that ring is lined with super-sensitive gamma ray detectors. The patient just lies on a bed that slides right into the center of it. And this is where the design gets really, really smart. Because those two gamma photons are traveling in opposite directions, they're going to hit detectors on opposite sides of the ring at almost the exact same instant. We're talking within nanoseconds of each other. The scanner's computer is programmed to ignore single hits and only pay attention to these coincidence events. When it sees two hits at the same time, it knows they came from the same annihilation, and it instantly draws a straight line between those 2 points. That line is called a line of response. Now, a single line of response just tells us that the annihilation happens somewhere along that line. That's not super helpful by itself. But by collecting millions and millions of them, we can go from simple lines to a detailed three-dimensional map of the body's inner workings. You see, over the course of the scan, millions of these annihilations are happening every second. A super powerful computer records every single line of response. Then, using some pretty complex algorithms, it looks at where all these millions of lines intersect. In the areas where a huge number of lines cross over each other, those are the hot spots. That's where our radioactive tracer has built up the most. The final result is this incredible, colorful image. This one here is a PET scan of a brain. The colors show us the concentration of that tracer. So the bright yellow and red areas, those are the hot spots, the places where cells are burning through the most glucose. This gives doctors a map, not of the brain's structure, but of its activity. And this is maybe the most important takeaway of all. It's the difference between what a PET scan shows and what an X-ray or a CT scan shows. X-rays give us structural images. They show us anatomy, like the shape of your bones or organs. But a PET scan, it gives us a functional image. It shows us what the cells are actually doing on a biochemical level. This lets doctors spot abnormal activity long before it ever causes a physical change you could see on a CT scan. And that ability is what makes PET scanning so unbelievably powerful. It's a game changer for early disease detection. In oncology, it can find cancer, see if it has spread, and even check to see if a treatment is working. It's also invaluable for understanding really complex heart conditions and brain disorders, like Alzheimer's or epilepsy, by mapping out how those organs are actually functioning. So, from harnessing antimatter to mapping the hidden, secret functions of the human body, the PET scan really did turn science fiction into a life-saving reality. And it just makes you wonder, if this is the incredible stuff we're doing today, what in the world is the future of medicine going to look like?